It is our pleasure to bring in our good buddy Pete Prisco on this breaking news afternoon as James Gladstone has been announced as the new Jaguars general manager. Pete, thanks so much for joining us.
Damn, he beat me out. I'm kind of upset about it.
I was pulling for you. You had one glaring problem. You're not a child.
You know what? I look at these hires, and everybody's going to around the league is going to open some eyes. And oh my gosh, they didn't go conventional, and why didn't they go get a guy? Well, they went conventional the last couple of times. How'd that work out for them?
Exactly.
Not very well. I mean, Trent Baalke, conventional. Doug Peterson, conventional, and it didn't work. And so I have no problem with going outside the box and hiring somebody. I mean, like I always say, it's just football. And it's not that complicated. And I've worked with a lot of people around this league that have been in the league. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate it. And Gladstone is a bright, young guy who happens to have a football background, but he also is very good at analytics and applying that to the scouting. And, look, I know people that say, well, where'd he come from? You know where he came from? I'll tell you where he came from. He was the offensive coordinator on Les Snead's son's football team in high school in St. Louis. Les was so impressed with him, and I've known Les a long time. Les is smart. Les was the gopher on the Jaguars' first staff. He had to go get Andre Rison out of bed. But Les Snead is a good football guy. If he thought this guy had talent and brought him in, and he made him work his way up, too. It wasn't like he just gave him a job and made him the director of college scouting. He made him work his way up. He did. He was impressed with him, and then he, made him director of college scouting. And look at their draft. I mean, this team was built at one point by going all in, making trades like trading away first-round picks, going to get a guy like Jalen Ramsey, win a Super Bowl, but then you got to rebuild it. And if you look at his drafts the last 3 years, Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, okay, there's your first two this year, Blake Corum, who played, Cam Kitchens, who played, and Bo Limmer in the sixth round, who was the starting center, and then Whittington, the wide receiver who played. Then you go to last year, Avila, starting offensive lineman, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, McClendon has played, Puka Nacua in the fifth round, and then you go to the next year, Kyron Williams in the fifth, Quentin Lake, big part of their defense in the sixth. I mean, they had to retool it, and he did it. And so I like the hire. I know it's not what everybody in this league thinks it should be, or it's not, one of the guys' names was all over the place, but I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I like the hire too, Pete. And Hacker and I were talking about this before, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. So obviously they've got to make a lot of decisions quickly. They're behind many of the other clubs that, either, didn't make the playoffs and kept their coach and GM. I mean, they've been working on their offseason plan now for 6 weeks. So obviously they've got to make some decisions pretty quickly. What would be your advice on Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, and whether to retain those players or release them?
Well, I would go to them first and see if they would take cuts. And if they wouldn't take cuts, then I'd probably release them. I mean, you saw last year you have replacements for him. You have a replacement for Christian Kirk. So I don't think at that salary he's worth keeping around. He's a good player, but he's not worth that salary. So I think you go to him and you say, hey, look, we'd like to keep you around. I know, Trevor likes you, but you'd have to cut that salary down. And if he says no, then you let him go. And, same with Ingram. But Ingram's a little bit different because you do need another pass-catching tight end there. And I know they have Strange, and he flashed at times, and then the team didn't throw to him, and then he disappeared. And, it's hard to evaluate him based on the usage last year because it was weird. In fact, a lot of things on that team were weird. But I think I'd go to both of them and say, hey, we'd like to keep you, but we might make you take a pay cut. If they say no, then, maybe you make a decision and let them go.
Pete, it's interesting. Good to talk to you, by the way, my friend. It's interesting in the complete 180 that this organization has made in the last 6 weeks. I mean, it was 6 weeks ago you had that weird Zoom press conference with Shad Khan and Trent Baalke that was just bizarre and odd and strange. And Ben Johnson then, goes to Chicago, and people think the sky is falling. And then Liam Cohen says, well, I'm out. And then Baalke gets fired or asked to part ways 4 hours later. And now here we are talking strictly to the Jaguar fan base that's listening. And I can tell you, right or wrong, people here are over the moon about what has transpired this offseason in the last month or so, the decision Shad Khan has made.
And they should be. I mean, let's be real. A lot of that starts with bringing Tony Baselli in to oversee the whole thing. And now I get to rip him to shreds every week, just like I used to rip the team. He's part of it now, so instead of doing the show with him, I can rip him every week, and I will. And I've told him that already. But, I mean, you needed a guy, a liaison between the owner and the football side. And they didn't have that. He didn't have any confidants in that building. It was either go to Balky and listen to his crap, and which is why he said, "Oh, this is the most talented team that we've had," because Balky told him that. So he said that. Who do you think told him that? So now he has somebody that he can lean on in Tony, which I think is good. Cohn comes in; he's going to have a lot of juice and as it relates to all the football stuff, which is good. And now you're bringing a young, general manager, and I think the staff. You look at the staff, a lot of youth there, but that's not a bad thing. Everybody always says, well, he's only done this long. It's not that complicated. You go in, you let your coaches coach, and if they're good coaches, they will show that they're good coaches, whether they're 35 or 55. And I think that's the biggest difference with this team.
Yeah, I think that's well said, because if you're looking for innovation, you're more likely to find that in 30-year-olds than you are 60, 70-year-olds. I mean, that's just life. So
bite your tongue.
Well, Pete, you've got a system that obviously has worked for a long time. I'm curious. Obviously, Trayvon Walker is now eligible for an extension. I don't think that's a decision they necessarily need to make anytime soon. His number is I think $11 million next year. So even if they did the extension, it might. It might save them a little bit of money. It might cost them a little bit more depending on how they structured it, but it wouldn't drastically change their cap or anything. But just in your viewpoint, where is Trayvon Walker in his career, and would you go ahead and get that extension done, or would you want him to play on his fifth year option and possibly a tag?
I'd let him play. I'd go into this season and see, new staff, new defensive coordinator. Let's see what he does. And look, he's been good. He just hasn't been great. And they drafted him with the idea he would be great. So I think you want to see what he can do. I thought they both got too heavy last year. If he's going to get heavy, then he needs to move inside. Hines Allen was too heavy last year. He needs to trim down again. And they need help around him, which is why you're sitting at number 5. You got a real opportunity to get a guy like Mason Graham. You might go in that direction, or since it's a deep, defensive lineman draft, defensive tackle draft, you could take Travis Hunter in that spot and come back and get one in the second round. So I think they need to get bigger and tougher. If the Philadelphia Eagles haven't taught us one lesson out there, it's just that you're a big, physical, nasty, violent team, and everything else will work its way around that. And Jacksonville hasn't been a big, nasty, physical team in a long time, and they need to get back to that. And that means getting a new right guard. That means maybe getting a new center. He's he's on his last legs. He's got 1 year left, and getting tougher in the middle of their defensive line. I think those are all priorities for them this season. And if they do that, they're not that far off. There's good players there. They got a couple. You got to get a corner. You got to get safeties. They do have money. They can free up some money. They can go get some guys if they want to in free agency.
Pete, you kind of just answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway. James Gladstone's got to get to work quick. Free agency is 2 weeks away. The Jaguars only have, I think, a dozen in-house unrestricted free agents, and they only have 2 starters. Brandon Sheriff at right guard, Andre Sisco at safety. Would you let both guys walk?
See ya. Yeah. I mean, look, in fairness to Sheriff, he's played a lot of football. His body's beaten up. He plays like he's beaten up. He was okay last year. He got better as the season went along, but I don't think you can give him anything for more than if he wants to come back on a year, maybe. But I don't think you give him anything more than that. If he does want to play, Sisco, I'd let go. I thought Sisco regressed in a big way last year. There were times where I didn't think he played as hard as he should have played, which is always concerning. He didn't look like the same sudden guy he was 2 years ago, so that's a cause for concern there. And I think you can find safeties. I mean, you can go get a veteran if you want to. You can draft a young guy. I think the safety position needs to be revamped in Jacksonville. Savage wasn't the answer. Antonio Johnson hasn't been the answer, and neither has Cisco.
In terms of free agents, we don't know exactly who's going to hit the market, but it doesn't appear like the franchise tag is really going to be a factor in the NFL offseason this go around. Who are a couple of free agents that you think the Jaguars should have their eyes on and be ready to make a competitive offer to once legal tampering begins?
Well, I have to decide what they're going to do with the center position, because if they're not going, if the center position isn't going to be fixed, or if they're going to play with Morse again, then they need to stay away from this guy. But Drew Dahlman's a guy from the Falcons. He's 26 years old. He's a good quality starting center. Now he's coming off an injury. He'd be a guy I'd look at. I'd look at a veteran corner. I mean, there are corners on the market. You know, you look at Carlton Davis is on the market. You know, Ward, who didn't, you know, he had all kinds of issues, you know, for the 49ers last year off the field, didn't play as well. He's on the market. You know, who's a good safety if they want to go for a safety? Morig from the Raiders, good underrated player. You could get a guy like, so you could get, if you came out at a free agency, got a starting safety like Morig, a starting corner, if you're going to go in that direction and you're not going to take a guy like Travis Hunter, then you get a corner. You don't need to take Travis Hunter. Maybe you get, you know, Carlton Davis, and then maybe you get an offensive lineman, whether it be, you know, the center or maybe Will Freeze from the Colts. A guy like that you could plug and play. Maybe Murphy's the corner, James Daniels the lineman. I think you need to come out of free agency with a starting safety, an offensive guard, and a corner. If you can do that, then you don't force yourself into being, you know, taking somebody. And then in the draft, if you're sitting there at 5, if you don't want to take Graham, you could take Hunter, and then you could come back and take a defensive tackle in the second round. I think those are the priority positions. One other thing, another speed receiver, because they need more help there. And I think they could, you know, Gabe Davis, something's up with him. I think we're going to hear that he was hurt all year because he looked heavy. He didn't look fast. I've been watching.
He was using a cane at Liam Cohen's introductory press conference.
Yeah, all year. Nobody said a word about it. You could just tell. And here's why. You guys, when the Bills are getting ready to play the Chiefs, they kept playing the game, the 13-second game, over and over again. And that Gabe Davis, who was in that game, where the hell did that guy go? Mm-hmm. Because he looked fast and explosive and dynamic, and he certainly wasn't that for Jacksonville last year. So I think that, you know, they got to bring him back because the contract says so. So if he's in shape, and then you still need one more guy. And I think you can find, this is a great receiver draft. I've been doing all my work with it. There's a ton of receivers in this draft. They can get guys in this draft.
Pete, you tend to connect the dots when it comes to free agency with the guys the Jaguars have brought in, whether it's Campanile from Green Bay, Udinski from Minnesota, Gladstone from the Rams. Are we overthinking that, or do you think there's merit there?
I think sometimes you overthink it. Remember, the coaches aren't the guys making the decisions. Now, they'll give their input, but you know, Gladstone and Liam Cohen are going to be making those decisions, and Tony will have input as well, but not necessarily the coaches. You'd like to hear from the coaches, but, you know, in this league, a lot of times coaches push sometimes too far, and it doesn't work. But I'll say this, you know, the coaches had great input in what happened in Washington last year with the free agents, and that seemed to work. If you go back and connect the dots, they brought a lot of guys in that they knew. Dan Quinn brought a lot of guys in he knew. They brought guys in from Carolina that they knew. So they brought a lot of guys in that they knew, and it seemed to work. But those are only like one-year contract type of situation. So you have to be careful with that. I mean, I'd lean on everybody in the damn building. I think that's one of the big flaws, Hacker, in the whole NFL, is a guy gets a job, and he's the GM, and all of a sudden now he's going to do it his way, and that's it. And I'm not going to listen to anybody else. I know GMs have fired scouts that disagreed with them. If I have a scout who disagrees with me on a player, I'm going to go back and reevaluate that player on my own. Then I'm going to go back and sit with that scout and say, hey, you know what? You were right. I was a little low on this guy. And I want input from everybody in the building. I want to hear your opinions, because just because I'm the guy in charge, yeah, I'm making the decisions, but it doesn't mean that I wasn't once that guy sitting on the other side of the desk that thought I knew something that could have helped the organization, and they never asked me. So I think that's going to change in that building now in a big way.
When are you getting to the Combine?
Monday. You guys going?
Nice. Yes, it'll be me, Frank, and Mia. So we're
Okay.
getting there Monday as well. So
Yeah, I will see you, and we will sit down and chat for sure.
that sounds great. Pete Prisco, we always appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you in Indianapolis.
Hey, Mia here, and thanks so much for watching 1010XL Jaguars. For even more coverage of the Big Cats, be sure to subscribe to 1010XL Jaguars.